as an advisor to the governors since December 2023. And then Ms. Mish is a senior economist, and Mr. Kariso Mpatlele, an associate economist, and Ms. Chloe, an economist. In the three of them, they all come from the Economic Research Department divisions. And then we have Ms. Florence, who joined the bank in 2007 as a HR practitioner, and is currently serving as a senior HR business partner in the office of the Governor Cluster. So those are our guests who will be presenting around the monetary policy or enticing us about the monetary policy.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us. We're starting just a few minutes beyond time, but I'll try and make that up. Yeah, how we want to do this, Mish and I are going to do this presentation on inflation targeting and more broadly about what the work of the Reserve Bank, and then we'll do a Q&A. And I think you should treat this opportunity to do the Q&A. If you want to ask other things about the SARB's work, feel free to do so. You've got a whole lot of SARB people here. You know, we all know quite a lot about what the SARB does. So if there's something on your mind that you'd like to understand better, that's great. This is a good opportunity. Okay, for my next challenge, I'm going to figure out where the presentation's gone. And hopefully, that's going to... Okay, this is going to work. Yeah, I think I'm doing that. Yeah. Great. Thanks. Okay, so, you know, this presentation is really focused on the so-called primary mandate. We call it the primary mandate because it's in the Constitution. And the Constitution says we have to protect the value of the currency in the interest of balance and sustainable growth. So I'm going to talk about how we do that. I'm going to talk about the inflation target. I'm going to talk about the process where we arrive at interest rate decisions. I'm going to try and smuggle in here a little bit of discussion of the other things the SARB does. And I want to sort of make one headline point just to start off. I was very reluctant to join the SARB. I had this impression it was going to be the super conservative institution that kind of sat in Pretoria and didn't do much new, and I was going to be very bored there. And I had a good surprise. I never thought I'd stick around for 11 or 12 years. And it turns out there were times in its life when I think the SARB was that kind of staid institution. But it's actually been a much more interesting place to work. You do a lot of interesting policy stuff. They're really interesting problems to get engaged with. And so a message I'd have for students is, I'm surprised how hard it is for us to find talent to hire. I don't just mean in the research department. I've sat through so many interviews where we look at 200 CVs, we kind of find 10 people we're going to interview, we do 10 interviews, we hire no one. Because we really struggle to find people who are engaged by this stuff, who can get into the problems. And so I think people should really think hard about what it's like to have a career in policy and how nice it can be. And the fact that, you know, making your life trying to solve problems at a high level is a really interesting thing to do. And I hope more people would approach it like that. Okay, let me talk a little bit about the mandate. So the primary mandate in the Constitution, and we've also got this legislative mandate to do financial stability. These descriptions, but there's a huge amount of payments work that goes on at the SARB, and we run the payment system and various other projects, all of which are really interesting to get into. We're the banker to government, we run auctions for government, and so a lot of people in the SARB don't just work on doing price stability, they don't just work on doing financial stability, they do all this other interesting stuff. You know, we think that price stability is very important, no surprise, so we have this high-level mandate to protect the value of the currency. And since 2000, we've interpreted that as we're going to do that through inflation targeting. So we've got this inflation target of 3 to 6%, and then we try and keep inflation within that band. We do it in a flexible way, so we don't have to keep inflation within 3 to 6 every single month. You get shocks that push you up or push you down. Rather, we try and make sure that inflation is always coming back to target over a period of about 2 years. Monetary policy takes about 1 to 2 years to transmit to the economy. So there's very little you can do about shocks that hit you right now. It's mostly about that medium-term perspective, ensuring that inflation is always coming back to target. A couple of reasons why it's important to keep inflation under control. One is a poorer person or a person who's on a fixed income like a pensioner, if inflation is high and volatile, those guys just get wiped out. So inflation, in a sense, is just a brutally regressive tax. If you want to try and have a developmental policy that relies on high inflation, what you're really doing is taking resources away from relatively vulnerable people and pushing them to other parts of the economy. So we kind of made this decision as part of the constitutional framework, embedding down macro policy at the end of apartheid, say we want to have lower and more stable inflation. We don't want to rely on inflation taxes as a way to extract resources from the population. Second consideration is that when inflation is high, when inflation is volatile, people find it incredibly difficult to make investment plans, to make savings plans. They don't know what inflation is going to be like, so they really don't know what the payoff from an investment project is that has an horizon of 20 years or whatever it is. You've got to build some kind of inflation compensation into interest rates, so you tend to get much higher nominal interest rates in places that have high inflation. So the idea was if you can stabilize inflation at moderate levels, it's going to be easier for people to plan for investment and to plan their savings. And then the last set of considerations is what inflation does to your exchange rate. The more you put up prices, which is inflation, the more expensive you are. So you can get into this very unfortunate place where you're a very expensive country and you don't export much because of that. So there was this consideration that you want to try and have an inflation rate that's kind of in line with those of your trading partners so that you don't lose competitiveness. The chart, of course, just shows inflation rates for different income deciles to make this point that inflation experiences can really hurt poorer people. So this is just a long chart, goes all the way back to the 1980s. The twilight of apartheid was really a time of very poor macroeconomic performance. And one of the indications of that was very volatile and very high inflation, double digits, close to 20%. And there was a really marked improvement in macroeconomic performance of South Africa as you moved through the democratic transition. I think that first decade was kind of difficult, that period 1994 into early 2000s. I think fiscal policy improved a lot faster than monetary policy. I get frowned at for saying this a few years ago, but I think the SARB did actually pretty poorly in the period from 1994 through to about 1998. And there was a real dramatic improvement in monetary policy which took place with the introduction of inflation targeting, the abandonment of things like exchange rate interventions. They were using an incredibly complicated framework where kind of everything was a target. They cared about money supply, they cared about the exchange rate, they cared about inflation, they cared about credit. I think they confused themselves what they were trying to do. The introduction of an inflation target regime built a much kind of cleaner, more focused framework, which also happily meant we lost a hell of a lot less money. We used to lose an awful lot of money trying to intervene in the exchange rate, and we stopped that. A kind of more important outcome was that inflation targeting regime appears to have been successful in getting inflation down and getting it to stay mostly within that target range. And that's what the chart on the right-hand side is telling you. Latest inflation print in hand, 3.8%, so a little bit towards the bottom of our target range. We're very happy about that. A lot of countries in the world still struggling with above target inflation, and South Africa, one of the rare examples of a country that's got inflation in line with the target and well under control. So this, I'm afraid, kind of repeats some of what I just said. What we tried to focus on lately, there was a period, you've got a target like 3 to 6. Well, what does 3 to 6 mean? Does it mean 3? Does it mean 6? Does it mean something else? And for a long time, it was very unclear what exactly we meant by that. And people wrote academic papers trying to estimate what the implicit inflation target was. They usually concluded that we were aiming for something like 5.999. We had a big strategic effort in the SARB, which was announced in 2017, to say we were going to aim for the middle of that target over time. 3 to 6 meant 4.5 over time. And we think we've been pretty successful in getting inflation to average about 4.5 since we did that. This was a major initiative of the Governor Kganyago. The other thing I think you should take away from this chart is just how different the experience was. There was that difficult early period bedding down inflation targeting, and the late Tito Mboweni really deserves a lot of credit here for making this framework function. But you had that initial period where you had quite high inflation, you had quite high interest rates, and I think we've moved into a mature phase of the targeting framework over the last 10 years or so, where you have generally lower interest rates and generally more stable inflation. The nice thing about inflation targeting is it tends to work better as you go on, as you bed down your credibility and people get used to it. One of the things you really want to achieve in an inflation targeting regime is to get inflation expectations under control. So I have this interesting experience. You're just out and about and you ask people, not necessarily economists, this wouldn't be the kind of questions you'd ask you guys, but just more ordinary citizens, firms, businesses, what causes inflation? And people always come with answers like, oh, it's petrol prices, it's food prices going up, or sometimes they'll say it's too much demand in the economy. What's interesting about that is most inflation really isn't caused by those things. Because everyone in the world has those shocks. Every country in the world has demand shocks, but different countries have totally different rates. I think it's very helpful actually to analyze inflation using a triangle model, as Diamond called it, where you have demand factors, supply factors, and then you've got some kind of trend component of inflation, which is something like what people expect inflation to be, the momentum they build in, the indexation. They experienced 5% inflation last year, so now they raised their wages by 5%, they raised their rental agreements by 5%. And we kind of get a handle on this by looking at inflation expectations. What you want to do kind of fundamentally as a central bank is convince everyone that inflation is going to be in line with your target, and then get them to treat that as normal and put that into all their price and wage setting behaviors. So we have this great survey, goes back to 2000, of where people think inflation is going to be over time. And it's certainly moved down within the target range. We had a kind of unpleasant time. There's been this horrible inflation surge from late 2021 until quite recently. It's a global inflation surge, some of the highest inflation we've experienced in 20 to 30 years everywhere. A lot of it linked to the war in Ukraine, to oil price shocks, and food price shocks and so on. And unfortunately, people looked at that, and you can see towards the end of the chart, people started to think that inflation was going to be a bit higher, even over 2 years ahead. But now they're learning again that the SARB really means it when we say we're going to get inflation under control. And so expectations seem to be shifting back towards the middle of the target range. And that for us is a very important indication that we're doing our job. You're never going to control short-run inflation, but getting those medium-term expectations, getting trend inflation under control, that's kind of the core of the job. Now I thought I'd tell you a little bit about how we implement monetary policy and how we practically go through this process. So we have a totally classic framework. We've got an inflation target and you've got a short-term interest rate to do it. And this has become enormously popular in the world, mostly emerging markets. There was a period where it was the advanced economies who were kind of championing inflation targeting. But in many ways, inflation targeting is now an emerging market phenomenon. Lots of countries who are emerging markets have moved to inflation targeting, and they apply this pretty classic inflation targeting where you use an interest rate to achieve your target. Some of the advanced economies got in trouble in the last decade. They hit the zero lower bound on interest rates. They had to try and find all these new tools like QE, which really didn't work as well as interest rates. But this framework of using an interest rate to target inflation is really the best practice, and it's really performing best, I would say, in emerging markets. So here's how our meeting goes. We do this every 2 months. We show up on the Tuesday. On Tuesday, we just listen to presentations. We have a presentation by the financial markets team. We have a presentation by the global economy team in research. We have a presentation by the real economy team in research in the morning, and then the afternoon we do the forecast presentation. So it's quite a big group in the morning. A lot of them younger staff get the exposure there. They sit with the MPC. Everyone's welcome to ask questions. Then we shrink it down a bit for the afternoon. We have a smaller group to do the forecast. That, I think, to me, is the most valuable presentation we do. Then there's a little chat with 1 or 2 senior staff right at the end of the day, the head of stats, head of FMD, and a couple of other senior staff. And then everyone goes home. And then on Wednesday morning, just the members of the MPC show up. We go sit in the governor's boardroom. They have a team of technicians sitting outside to make sure nobody's eavesdropping on us electronically, because this is market-sensitive information. I only learned this recently, which is why I bring it up. Who are these guys lurking right here in khaki? Turns out they're like the Secret Service people to make sure no one's listening in. So then we talk. And how it goes is, you sit around the table, Chris, the chief economist, kicks off and he says, here's what we could do, option A, option B, option C. He's meant to talk through all the options. He gives some thoughts on the economy, on inflation and so on, and then he gives his vote. And then we go around the table. I'm last to speak except for the governor. There are 2 kinds of central banks. There are the central banks where the governor speaks first, and there are the central banks where the governor speaks last. Best practice is to speak last, especially when you're a governor like ours. He has a big personality. And it may just be the case that if he speaks first, people might find that they maybe need to agree with him. So it's good practice that he speaks last. He did say to me when I joined the MPC, it's like, listen, David, in general, I want you, to go along with what I say. But in the MPC, you are free to disagree with me. And you should disagree with me. You are not doing your job right if you agree with me every time, which is nice to hear. But still, it's good, it's best practice to let the governor speak last after we've heard everyone else. So we go around, everyone gives their opinion on what the decision should be. And then if we all agree with each other, it's easy. If we disagree with each other, we have a nasty fight. And then, eventually we get to some sort of agreement on what the decision's going to be. Sometimes it's more of a vote. Sometimes it's more of a, okay, I hear you, let's do this. And then we spend the next hour and a half just finalizing the statement. So we draft a statement in advance, but we spend a lot of time going through that paragraph by paragraph and debating it. And then we're done for the day. Then we show up on Thursday and just do the press conference. And then we go off and have a drink together to try and become friends again, because often the friendships have been a little bit eroded by the Wednesday discussion. Sometimes people tell me there's groupthink at the SARB. My God, I wish we had groupthink at the SARB. We disagree with each other pretty vigorously. So this is the Monetary Policy Committee. You can tell the more important you are, the better the photographer you get. So the governor is like beautifully lit, good photographer, and then that David guy at the end, somebody showed up at my house and said, try without the glasses, and took this photo and ran away. I don't like the photo, but anyhow. So that's the 6 of us. It's a pretty nice group of people to work with. One of the really nice things about being at the SARB is you have very smart colleagues. You can really learn from them. And so that's one of the things I've really enjoyed, and I've spent a lot of time with a lot of these people, and it's a good group. I think I should wrap up. I've just got 1 or 2 more comments to make here about transparency. So the thing is, the SARB, we have independence. We have independence to achieve a mandate. We're an independent institution within a democracy. If you're going to be independent, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be accountable. So what we try and do to ensure that there is a high level of accountability and that people can trust us is we try and be very open about what we're doing. So we do things like we come on these events, we come and give lectures, we do these talk to the SARB forums around the country, we publish a lot of the information about what we're doing, all our forecast assumptions, all of this stuff, we make it available to try and get to this place where if people want to know what are those guys doing in their tower, it's pretty easy to find out what they're doing in their tower and why they think this way. There is this transparency index, so you can see it's a whole bunch of countries. Higher score is a better score, and we rank pretty high. The one thing we get beaten up for in these indexes is that we don't release minutes of the MPC. But we're pretty convinced that that's a bad idea, because we've looked at other central banks who release minutes, and we go and talk to them, and they say, oh, you don't want to go this way. Because what happens is, everyone knows that whatever they say in the meeting is going to be out in public. So they walk into the meeting with a prepared statement, and they just read that. And then they stop, and then everyone goes to the bathroom, and that's where you decide monetary policy, because then you're not on the record. So we're pretty happy that we don't do minutes. This is just some further discussion of some content we put out. We put out this monetary policy review explaining what's going on with monetary policy. And we even give you forecasts for things like where we think the policy rate's going to go. Lately, we've been easing policy off. We were at 8.25, we cut to 8 at the last meeting. And if things go right, I anticipate we're going to move closer to normal over the next few meetings. This I've covered. These are the different meetings we go to around the country. They used to be called monetary policy forums, but now they're called Talk to the SARB forums because we don't want to just do monetary policy. And we have these various programs, schools programs, try and get people at a high school level. They pretend to be the MPC, and then we have a big event, and that goes pretty well. We've got this winter school. The winter school, I think, has been really a fantastic initiative. We get smart people from a lot of universities, including this one, and we tend to hire quite a lot of those people. So it's great. You see them in winter, and then a few months later they show up at the SARB, they've got a job there, and those people seem to be doing very well in the organization. Okay, I think I'll wrap it up here. Time's a little bit short, but after Mish has spoken, let me just reiterate the Q&A. Let's have a big open Q&A. Ask me anything. Let's, if you've got something on your mind, let's get it out today. Thanks a lot. Mish, all yours.
Good morning to everybody, the staff and the students. And today I'll talk about the Economic Research Department and what we do as ERD economists. So I'm going to start by showing you how the ERD contributes to the strategy of the Reserve Bank. We will talk about the strategic focus areas, or SFAs. The first SFA is the maintenance of the headline inflation within the target range. we use the objective of the maximization of monetary policy effectiveness. The strategic measure involves conducting research that is aligned to the policy objectives of the bank. Then we move on to SFA 4, where we enhance the resilience and the external shocks to the economy, improving the monitoring of existing and emerging vulnerabilities. And the measure that the ERD uses to contribute to the strategy involves the monitoring of macroeconomic impacts of external shocks and policy measures. Moving on to economic focus area, the coordination of policy making and implementation. The objective is to improve our approach to research and policy formulation, and not forgetting the strategic measure in which the research department contributes to this focus area is the successful delivery of the cross-departmental research agenda. Now we will look at the management organogram of the Economic Research Department and a few subdivisions. So at the head we have Dr. Chris Luvalt, which is also an MPC member. And moving on to the subdivisions, we have the macro forecasting division, who's led by Theo Janse van Rensburg. Moving on to the policy development division, which is led by Witness Simbane Gavi. We also have the global and domestic analysis division, led by Jean-Francois Messier. The model development division, led by Rowan Walter, and then we have the research division, led by Konstantin Makrolov. Now we will look deeper into some of those divisions. The macro forecasting division, they produce forecasts and present a 1 to 2 year ahead forecast to the MPC. We also generate research outputs in the form of economic notes, research briefs, and working papers. And then we also contribute to the monetary policy review and other key SARB publications. Then we can look into the policy development division, conducting economic analysis with the focus on domestic issues, presenting the domestic conjuncture to the MPC, the monetary policy review, research outputs, participation and engagement with the Common Monetary Area, SADC, and the Committee for Central Bank Governors. Drafting speeches, assisting the governors and deputy governors, preparing speakers, notes, and presentations. Global and domestic analysis conducts economic analysis, both domestic but more especially global, presenting these developments and trends to the MPC on the Tuesday of the MPC meeting, contributing to the monetary policy review, generating research outputs, and then also drafting the speeches and speaker notes, etc. The model development division develops and maintains economic models, supporting applied economics, a lot of research, a lot of maintenance of models such as the quarterly projection model, the main forecasting tool at the Reserve Bank, the core model, the disaggregated inflation model, and price models, providing forecasts, but mostly in the model development space, we use machine learning and little intervention, and then also generating research outputs. The Pure Research Division develops and executes the research agenda of the bank, mostly dealing with working papers and economic notes. They manage the Reserve Bank's working paper series. They coordinate climate change research in the Reserve Bank. They draft briefing notes, speeches, and presentations. And they also organize the ERD Winter School that is quite popular. So in terms of the skills that are looked for as an economist in the economic research department, clearly a background in economics, econometrics, statistics, computer programming, an individual that is competent in problem solving, critical thinking, data analysis, reporting, research and writing, very detail orientated, effective communication, verbal, written, and visual, an individual that can manage their time and can work in a fast-paced environment, but can also adapt to working with and under team members and independently. So if we had to quickly look at the economic research department network and themes, we have cross-departmental research collaboration that is within the Reserve Bank. We collaborate with members of other teams and units. We also collaborate with the University of Pretoria, with the Monetary Policy Chair and Research Fellows, and then other research fellows from other universities that contract with the bank, sometimes domestic, sometimes international, and they work for a limited period of time, and they produce research outputs. And then the Economic Research South Africa that produces the South African Journal of Economics, and then also tries to mesh research with national policy issues. So looking at some of the themes that the Reserve Bank research has been focusing on, it has been enhancing monetary policy efficiency, looking deeper into climate change and the implications for the SARB, macroeconomic policy coordination, and then also promoting financial inclusion, the digitization and competition in the financial sector. So I'm going to leave it there, and then we'll take Q&A. Thanks.
I'm hoping we provoke someone to an economic question. Let's just see if there's text in there. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, the next part of this is the careers presentation. Mish and I are hoping that someone's got an economics question before we do that. So we've got a bit of time for that. Usually how this works is you need someone to put up their hand and ask something. Once you've had the first, then it flows after that. So if anyone's just thinking about a question, this would be a really great time to be the person who puts up their hand. Thank you, sir. You see, you need one person.
Yeah, it's fine. My name is Elvis. My question is simple. Remember we came from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
What did the Reserve Bank do? You said in the presentation that you sort of mitigate external shocks.
Yeah.
You know, what are the practical things that you do? Because we know that food is expensive now, everything is expensive after COVID-19. So what are the practical things you did to mitigate the external shocks? Sorry, my brother.
I could hear you clearly. I hope everyone else could. It's a great question. So, interesting thing, when COVID hit, like early 2020, the initial shock was to reduce inflation. Petrol prices went down a lot, demand shock and so on. So inflation was actually below our target range for a couple of months. So the initial period was lower inflation, people suffering because the economy shut down, out of work and so on, stuff like that, and a very big disruption to economic activity in financial markets. So the initial response by the SARB was to cut the repo rate quite a lot. We went down to 3.5%, which is the lowest the repo rate's ever been, which pushed down people's borrowing costs quite a lot. We let the rand weaken because we knew inflation was going to be lower, and our target is inflation, not the exchange rate or something like that. There were quite bad financial market disruptions, so there was quite important work done by the financial market to kind of stabilize the system. The most sort of adventurous thing we had to do was buying bonds, government bonds, because that market was on the verge of breaking. So that wasn't QE or anything like that. That was to say, this is a really core market for the functioning of South African financial markets. If this thing breaks, it's going to have horrible repercussions across the system. So we went in and bought bonds, and that, with various other interventions, helped kind of stabilize that market, get it functioning again. We tried, you may have heard, there was the loan guarantee scheme. So there was this whole big scheme worked out with government, and the idea was to make loans to businesses, and the SARB was going to support this by doing the funding on its balance sheet. It didn't work very well. We didn't get very much uptake for that. And we tried several times to reinvigorate that scheme. There was, the bounce back scheme, there was the bounce back with energy scheme. We tried to extend this to solar loans, tried to help people recover from the KZN riots. We got less and less uptake every time. Like in the last program we did, basically no one showed up for that borrowing window. So I think the lessons we learned were the repo rate tool worked pretty well. The market stabilization tool worked pretty well. We really didn't get interest in the lending schemes, so that wasn't so great. The inflation surge then starts to show up in 2021, and then it really gets bad with the war in Ukraine, so 2022. And I think some central banks saw this coming well in advance. Usually the Brazilians, the Chileans, the Mexicans get the most credit. They started to tighten policy pretty early in 21. We took until late 21 to start moving back towards neutral, so the first increase was in November. But I think we did quite a lot better than the advanced economies who left it way too late. The Fed was still doing QE in early 2022. It's just amazing. They were so far behind the curve. They kind of caught up with the program, and then everyone tightened policy through 22. And I think the fruits of that you can now see in inflation having come down. And I think you can also see in the way core inflation, underlying inflation behaved. In South Africa, we didn't see large deviations of core from the middle of our target. So headline shot up, now it's coming back down again. But underlying inflation, which you've got more control over, stayed more or less in line with the target. On average, it's been slightly below 4.5 over that period. So I think that was, in a very challenging set of circumstances, was about the right response. That'd be interesting to hear if you had a different view. Okay, let's test the proposition. Yes, it has provoked other people. Here we go. Sir with the HP computer, and then the gentleman behind him. Yeah.
Right, thanks very much. My name is Ernest. Every time I see the governor, Reserve Bank, Lesecha Kanyago taking a podium, I think of the repo rate. Oh my God, the repo rate is always going up and all those kind of things. Therefore, it questions the standard of living in South Africa. That always goes up. It never goes down. I do not know why, because always the living standard goes up. Do you have any kind of policies? I do not know whether fiscal or monetary policy, just to keep the living standard, like to balance things, because the moment we increase the repo rate and all those kind of things, even the economic inequalities increases. Do you have any role to play in that kind of, in that regard? The last point that I want to make is that I just want to get to a view was on rand manipulation.
Yeah.
Was it there, this thing? Because I never followed the debate very well. Perhaps you can clarify. Was it, did we really have rand manipulation by certain companies?
Okay,
Thank
great,
you very
thanks.
much.
Yeah, good questions. Okay, so the repo rate went down at the last meeting. The market is expecting the repo rate's going to go down at the next meeting. And it thinks the repo rate's going to go down at the meeting after that. So if it never goes down, keep watching the governor and see how you feel about it. At the moment, the repo rate is above what we think is the normal or neutral level. We think we've got inflation under control. It makes sense to move back to at least something like a neutral stance. We think a neutral stance is something like 7 to 7.25%. We're at 8 now, so that kind of gives you a presumptive case for going lower. On inequality, I actually think, interesting thing about South Africa is most of the borrowing costs that are linked to the policy rate are of people in the top 20% of the income distribution. So it's not like other people don't have debt. Everyone in South Africa has got debt. But a lot of that debt is not linked very closely or at all to the policy rate we set. You know, when we move the policy rate, the things that move fast are car payments, they're mortgage payments, and that really hits the top of the income distribution just about the hardest. So I think where we benefit equality is that the higher repo rate lowers inflation. The inflation is hurting poorer people in South Africa, and it does so, so the lower inflation is a benefit for those people. The higher repo rate is mainly hurting relatively richer people. So I think it's actually a positive mechanism, although I don't think everyone experiences it that way. I often find people don't know how far up the income distribution they are. A lot of my colleagues are convinced they're middle class. So there's no way, guys. You're in the 90-something percentile of the income distribution. They don't appreciate just how unequal South Africa is. I mean, it really looks like that. I make it just a small point, by the way. I'm hoping we're going to change the name repo rate soon. One, nobody knows what the repo rate means. Like, what is this thing? Two, when they find out what it means and they say, oh, show me the data, so it's a repurchase rate. Okay, so you do repurchase lending. We hardly do any repurchase lending anymore. We changed the framework 2 years ago. It's almost all about taking deposits and paying the policy rate on that. In the last MPC statement, we didn't even speak to the repo rate. We just called it the policy rate. So there's a little stealth effort underway here to change the name of this thing. So watch this space. So the other question was on RAND manipulation. Yeah. So this came up last night actually at our forum as well. My sense of what happened with the RAND manipulation is, I'm absolutely sure somebody was doing some RAND manipulation, probably offshore. But I also think people have radically misinterpreted what this meant for the currency and interest rates. So what happens is you'll get these idiots sitting in chat rooms, with their buddies, and they'll say, I've taken a bet on the rand in one direction or another, up or down. And so, I needed to move by like 5 cents for 10 minutes this afternoon. And this is also the same thing that happened with LIBOR manipulation, the interest rate benchmarks. And so then, you line up some trades and you do it. And the rand will move by 5 cents for 10 minutes, and then this guy makes some money. And this thing is totally illegal, and when we heard about it, this was years and years ago, when we heard about it, there's a big crackdown and a strict code of conduct, and now there are very strong legal penalties if people are doing this. When you're sitting in the trading room, you're not allowed to have your cell phone with you, or your documents get logged and all this stuff. So I think that's been dealt with. But what really bugged me is, what's going on here, it's not like the rand was weaker because of this thing. It's not like inflation was higher. It's not like South African interest rates had to be different because of this. If you move the currency by 5 cents for 10 seconds, on one day, that does not change the macroeconomy. So the analogy I used last night is, this is like somebody told me, do you know, in the year 2000, there was a robbery at a little store in a little town in South Africa, and it was really scary and some stuff got stolen. Do I think that's bad? I definitely think that's bad. Did that change economic growth so GDP was different? It didn't. So I think people really misunderstood the macro of it. It was a bad thing, it was a deeply illegal thing, probably, but it wasn't a macroeconomic phenomenon. Oh, thank you. Sir, please. Yeah. Okay. I'll walk a little closer, so at least I will.
Yeah, no, I'm able to understand. Out of general curiosity, I want to believe that the inflation, the forecasting is not actually put out of the there are certain indicators that actually look at for actually making forecast. I'm more interested in that. What are the indicators that you guys use, and how can we, as a university, make use of those if we can use them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we have a series of economic models to try and forecast where GDP is going, where inflation is going, these other variables. We publish all the results of those models, all the important results. So every time we do an MPC meeting, alongside the MPC statement, we publish a document which contains the forecast for inflation, for core inflation, other components of inflation, for growth, for the current account, like all the key variables. So you can go and look at these, and we update these every 2 months. And so that's quite useful to people. And we look at other people's forecasts compared to ours. We do an analysis of the accuracy of the forecast. The research team has just done another accuracy analysis. And that's partly to learn lessons about how you make it more accurate, but it's partly also to establish that they are fairly accurate. And I think the results look pretty good. We compare ourselves to the IMF, we compare ourselves to other big central banks, and our forecasts tend to be about as accurate or a bit more accurate than theirs. Maybe it's a little bit easier to forecast for this economy. I think You do make mistakes from time to time. This COVID surge we were talking about was a humbling time for a lot of central banks. A lot of central banks did not realize how much inflation was going to pick up. The MPC has got to sit there and say, okay, we've got this forecast. The forecast is one input into the decision. We don't have to assume the forecast is 100% accurate. We also think about the risks. We have a big discussion about where the risks to the forecast are as well, to try and cater for that. I think the MPC got it right in 21. I wasn't there yet, so I'm not giving myself credit here. But I think they realized the risks were a bit worse than the forecast was capturing. But I encourage you, go and look at the materials on our website. It's part of being transparent is that all that is available. Yeah. So if you go to the SARB website, SARB, I think it's under statements, and then you click on the monetary policy statement, and then you'll find two documents. You'll find what the governor reads out on television, and you'll find this PDF, which has got all the projection numbers. We update that every 2 months, so you'll see all the history for every MPC meeting going back, I think, 2 decades. And so you can find the forecast there. And I think that'll be a helpful resource. And then you can also go and see if we were right or wrong. We mark this against things like Stats SA CPI, so you can see if we were wrong. Yeah. So, yes, sir. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, this is something we discussed in the pre-meeting. I understand that students here often use Reserve Bank data, and I understand that you often get it off the website. There is an app. The app works better than the website. I'm told by our team that not a lot of people use the app. I use the app. I use the app in preference to the website and in preference to emailing somebody and saying, hey, I'm the advisor, send me these data. The app actually works very nicely. So, because you are people under the age of 50, you will be comfortable using apps. I strongly recommend you go and look up the South African Reserve Bank app. It's got all the quarterly bulletin data in it. I think you'll find it helpful. Thanks for that reminder. Sorry, we had some more hands up. I think you're next, yeah.
Good morning. My name is Michael Parker. So, as much as the South African Reserve Bank focuses on inflation targeting, right? I know some of its focus is also on currency management. So I want to know, how does now SARB go about managing the exchange reserves? And then secondly, I want to know about the opportunities that exist at the SARB to promote that financial inclusion. Thank you.
Yeah, great, thanks. And colleagues, I think if someone wants to also answer questions, you are very welcome to jump in before I hog everything. The foreign exchange reserves, this is such an interesting area. If you look at our balance sheet, something like 95% of our assets are foreign exchange reserves. It's almost the whole balance sheet. Apart from that, it's just, a little bond portfolio, some buildings, a few other things. Almost all of the SARB's assets are foreign exchange reserves. We publish the breakdown of those reserves in our financial statements. So there's a lot of dollars in that. There's quite a lot of gold, and then there's little bits of renminbi, South Korean won, British pound. We used to have some yen, but you lose money having yen, so we don't have that anymore. So the portfolio, traditionally you speak to any reserve manager, they'll tell you the objectives of reserve management are capital preservation or safety, liquidity, and return. So you want to have the assets in a form that you can liquidate them pretty easily if you need to. You want this to be very safe assets. You're not trying to take a gamble on, Silicon Valley startups or anything. And you want to try and get a little bit of extra return out of them. So it tends to be quite a lot of government debt, some agency debt, things from supranational development banks that have great credit ratings, and some diversification. It'd be interesting to know if there's other details you want to hear about those reserves. I think the direction of travel here is, if the exchange rate gets strong again, we'll probably buy a few more foreign exchange reserves. I think we're a bit nervous about where the dollar's going. Dollar's very strong at the moment, but we're going to go through a very difficult period globally, I think, with the dollar, with the US government borrowing too much, with pressure on US interest rates. So I think there's a bit of nervousness about exposure to the dollar. So there's that aspect of it. Yeah, on financial inclusion, there are a few programs underway. If you want to really read about this, the document to go to is the National Treasury Report on Financial Inclusion that they put out at the end of 2023, November 2023. It's a really nice document. We consulted on that, but Treasury has the lead on this. They do policy with a big P on there, and we support them. So I really recommend that as a resource. I think the number one most important thing we're actually doing, apart from promoting competition in the banking sector by licensing new banks, it's really about the payment system at the moment. So, the SARB, I think we've taken the view now that notes and coin are very important. People like paying with notes and coin. That's always going to be there. It'll be there for many years. But payments are moving in a digital direction. the private sector, which is catering to very well-off people, has already moved pretty fast. So you can pay with your watch, and that's great, in some areas. But there are a lot of people who are being left out of that. So we're moving very aggressively through something called the Payments Ecosystem Modernization Program to kind of rebuild digital payments in South Africa in a very inclusive way. There are a couple of other countries, Brazil and India, the standout examples, which have really built basically ubiquitous digital payment systems. They're used by everybody. They're very cheap. They are in many ways better than cash, and the central bank has led those efforts. And I think we've looked at that and said, you know what, we can do much more here. So I think if you want to watch a subject, over the next 12 months, there's going to be pretty dramatic change in this space. As the SARB decides we're done waiting for the private sector to lead this thing, we're going to kind of play a leading role in it. And I think that's a pretty important part of our work. But it's bigger than the SARB. Treasury, FISCA, and so on does a lot of the work here. Yeah. Okay, we've got 5 more minutes, so let's try to take at least 2 more questions. I think, so in Black Europe, and then I'm going to come over to this side of the room. And the doctor. Doctor, I'll come to you then. Okay, the gentleman in black, please.
Thank you. My question is with regard to some of the significance, in fact, of some of the old frameworks in comparison to the inflation targeting one.
Yeah.
Because isn't it that in the past, before the stagnation, of course, you were using the Phillips curve framework as a guiding principle, of which it was clear, the objectives was clear, is that you were looking to deal with unemployment. But the policies that are used today, like it's almost like the reserve is aiming for a stable-oriented monetary policy, of which, in my view, it doesn't necessarily outline the objectives of unemployment and economic growth. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I think I get the question. Look, the Phillips curve is still used by all central banks. Our model's got a Phillips curve in it that relates unemployment to slack. So it's not like anyone's got rid of the Phillips curve. I think for central banking globally, there's this change from the period of like the 1950s, the 1960s, to a breakdown of that system and then to a new framework. I think the old naive version of the Phillips curve was that you have something like unemployment or economic slack and you have inflation and it's a menu of choices, and if you want to have more growth you just tolerate more inflation, and so you pick somewhere on the menu. And a lot of central banks were trying that through the 50s and the 60s, and what it failed to realize was that people learn. They learn what you're doing, and at some point you just get no extra growth, no extra employment, you just get more inflation. And that's when you lose control of inflation expectations, when people start to say, oh, I see what you're doing, I'm just going to raise my prices. You can't fool me anymore. That's what kind of gave you that rise in global inflation in the 1980s and made it so sustained. In the US, it required the Volcker shock to bring it down. Nowadays, people tend to talk about an expectations-augmented Phillips curve, which is one where economic agents learn, they understand the central bank, they change their behavior based on what you're doing. I think nowadays you can accurately summarize most modern central banks as operating more or less in line with a Taylor rule, where you try and set interest rates so that you want to close out the gap between actual inflation and your inflation target, but you also want to minimize the output gap. That's the measure of economic slack. You could do an unemployment gap. Basically, the US does an unemployment gap, but in a country like us where the unemployment data is basically unusable, it's so bad, we rely on an output gap instead, which is the difference between how fast we think the economy can grow and how fast it's growing. So I don't think we've thrown away any interest in growth and so on. I think we've said, let's be realistic about what we can achieve, what we can achieve in the short run and the long run, and we've built a framework that tries to get the right balance between those things. So I think that's the best way to look at it. Okay, then we had a couple of hands on the side of the room, and then I'm coming to the doctor. In grey, please, the gentleman in the polo shirt. Yeah. Hi.
Good morning, my name is Sylvester. My question is about cryptocurrency. Does the Reserve Bank see or view cryptocurrency as a threat to our traditional monetary system, or does it see it as the future, and how is it involved in terms of regulating cryptocurrencies, and does the Reserve Bank hold any cryptocurrency in its reserves?
So the last answer is no, absolutely not. I think there's a lot of promising stuff about some of the technology that went into things like Bitcoin. We had a study program, we had a team that worked pretty hard on it. They built out some distributed ledger products, and then they won some prizes for the experiment. So I think there's some aspects of this technology which are pretty interesting. I'm speaking just as myself now, not for the Reserve Bank. My personal belief is that cryptocurrency is kind of 80% a scam, 20% a nice innovation. I think it's sucked in a lot of people who think, oh, I'm going to get rich this way. And actually, like many scams, people who are already quite rich were draining money out of people who are already quite poor. They got in early, other people got in later, and they made the money off those guys. So I think you've got that problem with it. I'm not sure it's actually ethical to let this thing go. It also consumes way too much energy. I think the tax authorities are pretty worried that people are using it as an investment product that they're not taxed on, so they're going to be chasing that pretty hard. I think there are some countries where it really makes a lot of sense. If you've really broken your monetary system, Venezuela comes to mind. You could think of other countries. You need some other kind of distributed ledger, some other kind of payment technology that really protects you from the government-run system. But in South Africa, I don't think we're in that place. I don't think people have been using crypto as a payment technology. They've been using it as a kind of high-risk investment product. I think it's a bit more like sports betting. Other people think it's a bit more like investing. So I think most people lose their money on this thing, but it's some kind of investment gambling product. And then, I worry about people getting exploited and hurt, and I worry about the energy consumption. But, some of the technology is quite interesting underneath that. But definitely nothing in the foreign exchange reserves. Okay, I think the doctor, and then we'll wrap this up because I've used up my time allowance.
Okay, thank you, David. Mine is very unrelated, but yesterday you introduced us to the CODI to protect depositors to some extent. So I wanted to know, in case of bank failure like VBS, do the flag instruments and the required reserves play any role in protecting the bank that's failing? Or do you have any instruments that actually protect the bank?
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so the CODI is this new corporation for deposit insurance. South Africa has long been an unusual country in that we don't have formal deposit insurance. So now we have, a subsidiary of the SARB, and they make a promise: if you have money deposited in a licensed bank and something happens to that bank, we'll cover your deposit up to 100,000 rand. That covers well over 90% of depositors in South Africa. If you're a big company, that's not going to help. But if you're an ordinary household, almost no one has 100,000 rand sitting in the bank. So that's meant to protect those people. CODI has a fund, which is partly based on loans, so banks have to lend money to CODI, it can invest as it wants, and partly they just have to give money to CODI, and that fund is meant to cover those, if we have to pay out someone's deposits, that fund is there to pay that. But then you do have these protections to try and ensure that you don't have a bank running out of liquidity and you don't have a bank becoming insolvent. So part of that is all the microprudential regulation. The cash reserves sort of provide a form of liquidity. I don't think they're that important. We also have something called the liquid asset requirement that's much bigger than cash reserves, and we have the HQLA requirements, the liquidity coverage ratio. That's not really there to stop a bank becoming insolvent. CODI really kicks in when your bank collapses and then the depositors have lent to that bank and we need to make you whole. The other stuff is there to make sure that just if you have a liquidity problem, so you've got assets and the assets have value, and if all your depositors need the money back, you could sell the assets and pay them all out and everyone would be fine, but you can't sell the assets because they're mortgages or something. So those other regulations like the cash reserves and so on, that just makes sure you've got enough liquidity that if something goes wrong, you can get that. Honestly, the way we do monetary policy now, if we need to create liquidity to stabilize the system, we have tremendous powers to do that. I really don't think there's an upper bound on how much liquidity we could create if we need to. So I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about things like bad management at banks, bad investments, rendering the bank insolvent, and that gives you something you've got to fix. And you can't fix that with liquidity, but you can at least protect the depositors with CODI. Okay, I've used up all our time. I didn't give my colleagues any time to answer questions, so I apologize for that. But thanks, it's been a very nice Q&A session. I appreciate it.
So it's still morning. I almost said good afternoon. So good morning, students and lecturers. As introduced, I'm Florence Bokaba. I see familiar faces in the room from the winter school. It was a pleasure having Limpopo represented in our winter school. We had 2 winter schools thus far. We started the initiative last year with the Economic Research Department, so it's still a pilot that we're doing for the bank. We haven't done it as a bank-wide sort of initiative where other departments are involved. We had our first one last year. Our topic was climate change, and then we had another one this year where we did financial inclusion, right? Yeah. And it was a pleasure seeing Limpopo represented. And I'm told last night that there's somebody who got an offer to join the SARB. That's great news. So we are seeing Limpopo. We do recognize Limpopo at the Reserve Bank. That's the message that I want to put across. I'm going to talk about opportunities that are available at the Reserve Bank. Let me kick off by just talking to our employee value proposition attributes. So I think all of you would agree with me that the reputation of the Reserve Bank speaks for itself. So we're one of the few organizations that are held in prestige in the country, and we pride ourselves in that, and hence our brand and who we are is quite important to us. Another thing that is quite an attribute of the Reserve Bank to the core is the fact that we serve in the interest of public good. So working for the South African Reserve Bank means that you'll be contributing to the South African economy. You know, quite often when graduates or when people look for employment, I think what's at stake or in the equation, it's all about I give you something, you give me something in return, right? And quite often the answer becomes what's gonna be my bonus, how much am I gonna earn, are there share incentives, what are the benefits that come with working for the organization? So I'm going to sort of disappoint some of you, but I think some of you will be excited in saying that as the Reserve Bank, we're quite unique in the sense that public good and the kind of experience that you get, I mean, the things that David was talking to are not things that you'd ordinarily, come across in any other institution. So the unique work that you'd be doing, the public good, and I guess the satisfaction if you are one person who says, you know what, I want to make a difference in the economy of the country, the Reserve Bank would be a place for you to work in. However, if your motivation is more around the perks in terms of the money, and the bonuses, and the other frills that come with working for other corporates who are profit-making, unfortunately, the Reserve Bank may not be the employer for you. However, we do pay our employees quite well. You can see that I'm well paid, taken care of. Our colleagues are well taken care of, right? So we pay our employees quite well. Salaries or remuneration is market related, but what we don't do, we don't necessarily play in the space where we would have a tug of war over skills and using money as an attraction sort of tool. We'd rather talk to you about the valuable experience that you'll get. We'd rather talk to you about the stability that you'll get in working for the Reserve Bank. I guess none of you have ever heard that the Reserve Bank is retrenching, right? We can also pride ourselves in saying that in as much as you own your career at the bank, and we allow you sort of the space to plan your day in as far as it allows, depending on your role, work-life balance is something that is achievable at the Reserve Bank, versus if you're working for a relatively fast-paced, profit-making sort of organization where you kind of not even sure that you'll have, a job after the project that you're working on, That kind of stress is something that works against work-life balance, in the sense that you're constantly stressing about, will I have a job in the next 6 months? You might be permanently employed, but there's no guarantee that you'll have a job the following day type situation. And at the Reserve Bank, at least there's that piece where we provide that safe net to say that as long as you do what you've been contracted to do, and in most instances beyond, if you go beyond, then you'll be sort of satisfied and well taken care of. Okay. So that's what we are. In summary, that's what all of the those bubbles in our employee value proposition speak to. So at the Reserve Bank, all the opportunities that we have, we advertise, right? So other than the pipeline feeder initiatives or the graduate programs, the internships that we have at the bank, we have a policy at the bank. Any opportunity and every opportunity is advertised. It's very rare that we would advertise our opportunities internally only. Why? Because we always want to make sure that what we measure or make sure that we benchmark what we've got internally with what exists outside. So what we do, we create a bit of competition. Even though we might know that through our talent management and succession management processes, we've got capable individuals. We advertise internally and externally, and we allow both our internal candidates as well as external candidates to participate or to compete. And that's how we source at the Reserve Bank. So I'm going to encourage you to, if you have not yet done so, familiarize yourself with our website, log on to our website, look for our career site, check it quite often for opportunities that are available outside graduate or internship programs, because we do hire people directly from outside the bank into junior economist roles. I mean, we've got, for example, Kagiso. I'll allow him to introduce himself when I'm done. So Kagiso is born and bred in Limpopo from Leboa Khomo. How we cross paths with Kagiso. Kagiso applied to the bank through our website and he was appointed. He was relatively young. I'll say young because I'm older than him. So Kagiso is still relatively young and joined the bank not through the other pipeline initiatives, but he knocked at the door and said, hey, I'm interested in an opportunity at the Reserve Bank, and he was hired. So I would really appreciate and encourage that you keep tabs with our website. We are also trying to make sure that we show up in the social platforms like LinkedIn. So all our opportunities, we also try and promote them on LinkedIn. So maybe join LinkedIn if you haven't done so, and check our site from time to time. And that speaks to both the young as well as the experienced hires. So we are here not only interested in talking to young people who are looking at joining the corporate world, but we're also talking to academics who may probably feel that, you know what, I've contributed fairly well in the academia or in other spaces where I've been before joining the academia, and I would like to join a different institution and be at the forefront of what we do in terms of the economic space, and which is at the Reserve Bank. So we also encourage that if you are an experienced hire and you're looking for opportunities at the bank, please log on to our website, make contact with us, and we can also help you navigate the space in terms of areas of interest, in terms of talking to other departments within the bank about available opportunities or the scope of work that exists in the Reserve Bank. Okay. So we've got our graduate program. Some of you or most of you might have seen the graduate program. It closes quite early in the year. It closes around April. I think we open it in between Feb and April. Get inundated with applications. I think on an annual basis we get between 5,000 to 6,000 applications that so it's going to be important that as a student and as academics, we encourage our students to sort of differentiate themselves in terms of your academic achievements, in terms of making sure that when you're doing your honors or you're doing your masters, the research topic that you choose is something that is also interesting and that can open doors for you, not only at the Reserve Bank, but in other relevant institutions. Okay. So the graduate program has closed at the moment. We are in the process of extending offers, and I did indicate that we are confident that we have somebody that's coming from this university, at least one for now, as far as I know, that will be joining us in the graduate program. And then we also have a partnership with the Bureau of Economic Research in Stellenbosch, where we hire through them. It's an internship program, so we've got a contract with them. We've said to them, you know what, we would need you to help us train at least 3 interns, and that's the maximum number that they can get, whereas with the graduate program, we can get up to 20, 30, graduates at a time, depending on our operational requirements. So if we've got sufficient work, we've got opportunities to train, we do hire more interns. But with the BER program, at most, we can only take 3 because that's the limit that the BER can train on an annual basis. What we do, we hire these 3 through a rigorous selection process that is more or less similar to the graduate recruitment selection process. So they get their first interview at the BER, and then the BER would then shortlist and provide us with a shortlist of about 10, and then we take them through psychometric assessments, and then we take them through a panel interview. And in that process, we then ultimately decide on the top 3 that we then take through the internship. They spend 12 months at the BER, so the program runs from January to December. So you get an offer that says you've been hired as an employee at the Reserve Bank, but your first year you're going to be on training, and that serves as part of your probation. You are going to have to relocate and move to Stellenbosch and work closely with the economists at the BER and be trained in that regard. Upon completion of the internship or the probation period, you then come back to the Reserve Bank and you are placed in one of the divisions within the Economic Research Department. And that's how then you become part of the Reserve Bank family. Another opportunity or other opportunities that exist would be bursaries. We offer bursaries. At the moment, the bursaries would be for matriculants who are starting out, to study in tertiary institutions. We've got one that has been active for years. It's more a social responsibility, with a more social responsibility focus, where, you get a bursary, but mainly, we look at people who come from previously disadvantaged backgrounds. They would need to differentiate themselves through their marks in matric or grade 11 and matric. At the moment, I think we've got kids who get distinctions throughout their or in all their subjects in matric or grade 11. Those are the ones that would make it and get a bursary at the Reserve Bank. Through the CSI initiative, we don't dictate to them what they study. They would then study anything, that they would study at their choice of university. The bank will pay for as long as they pass or they are successful in their studies. Should you probably maybe need to repeat a module, you'll have to pay that at your own cost. And then we've also introduced a relatively new sort of bursary program with the Economic Research Department, where we're looking for matriculants who are interested in being economists and interested in policy development or policy making. So we follow the same sort of criteria in terms of selection as we do with the CSI one, but in this instance, we then say to you, we would prefer that you study something that is relevant to our business, and in this case, because it's the Economic Research Department, it would be in policy, and then we sponsor you for as long as you pass. We continue to sponsor you up to postgraduate level, and then we also have the first right of refusal, meaning that the intention is that once the students finalize their postgraduate studies, they would then be absorbed or hired into the Reserve Bank, subject to operational requirements. Okay, so those are the opportunities that are available at the Reserve Bank. And I think that summarizes the rest of the slides that follow. I'm going to just allow Kagiso. Kagiso, come and introduce yourself here. We in your hood, and tell our learners here how you, or our students here, how you landed at the Reserve Bank. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, looks like I might be slightly tall for this, but I'll try my best to bend over. So, again, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. I'm very delighted and excited to see each and every one of you. I mean, you took time off your very busy schedule to come here and share the day with us, so we really appreciate that. So I'm just going to say, so yeah, I'm one of you, as Florence has mentioned. Born and bred in this province, so I'm from a small township called Lubahomu. I'm sure all of you here are familiar with that. I actually saw a brother over there who we come from the same hood. So yeah, I was born and bred here, went to high school here until 2015, and then I went to study at the University of Pretoria. That's where I decided to study BCom in econometrics. So I did my undergrad and honors in econometrics at the University of Pretoria. And then when I did my honors, I was actually lucky. I was one of the few students who were selected for a scholarship to go do their master's with Fordham University in the US, in New York. But unfortunately, there's always a but unfortunately it was during COVID. So for 2 years, we had classes online. You can imagine the time difference. I remember we'd have like classes 1 o'clock in the morning. So it was very difficult for 2 years. But I mean, we're here today. So I mean, I understand that some of you here are doing your undergrad, some are doing honors, some are doing masters. So the one thing I'm going to say is if you do have the means and the opportunity to further your studies, do so. If you're doing your undergrad and you want to do your honors and further masters and PhD, do so. There's no limitations to these things. So the further you study, the more you stand out, right? So just a funny story, Florence, so you might not be aware of this. I remember this one time I was still studying, I was doing my honors at UP, and I really wanted to work for the Reserve Bank, right? And this one time I was free after class, and I printed out my CV. And I took a taxi to the head office, and I went to the security. I was like, hey, so I'm here, I've got my CV with me, and I want to hand it over. And the security guy said, no, this is not how we do things here. You have to look up for our vacancies on our website. So, and I was so devastated, I was so sad. I went home, I cried, and I was like, but one day I'm going to make it. Until in 2021, late 2021, they advertised, they put up their vacancies on the website, and I saw, so it was for junior employees. And then I applied. Luckily, I got selected for the interviews. I went through several rounds of interviews, and I got in. So I joined the Reserve Bank in March 2022 as a junior economist, right? And I can tell you it's been great. Almost 3 years so far. I've enjoyed each and every single part of it, the kind of work that we do and everything. So I am employed in the Economic Research Department in the Global and Economic Analysis Unit. So we're more focused on the global economy and of course the implications for the domestic economy. And the one thing I love about our department and my division specifically is that we get to interact with the MPC. Dr. David Folks being one of them. So as they've mentioned earlier on in their presentation, so every 2 months before the announcement of the MPC decision, so that Tuesday, because it happens on a Thursday, so the Tuesday before that we get a chance to present to them, so we give them some global developments and of course what that means for our domestic economy, right? So we get to also have to deal with some of the very difficult questions from them. But yeah, that's the kind of work we do. But I can promise you it's very exciting. So if you're very interested in monetary policy or policy in general, the Reserve Bank is the right place for you, right? And Florence has actually mentioned some of the opportunities at the Reserve Bank, so I'm not going to touch on that. But the one other thing I love about the Reserve Bank is that they actually promote young employees, not only young employees, but everyone to further their studies or to improve their skill set in any ways possible. So you can enroll for any kind of courses you want to do domestically or abroad. So everything's paid for. So if you want to further your studies, like I said, they also cover that. So like I said, I'm not going to be as long as I am. I'm just going to try and be short. So far it's been a great experience working with this such great individuals, and I've loved each and every single minute of it. Thank you.
So, Prof, I think, are we still good for time for questions related to careers at SARB? So the floor is open unless there are no questions. You are all on your phones and are on our website now, right? Okay.
No, thank you so much. I want to ask a question which is not really related to careers, but I think I can just take this advantage because you're already here. You know, establishing a bank or a bank like VBS, Itala, and so forth. It's a process which is a long process. So I just want to ask you right now to take us through the regulatory environment of the South African Reserve Bank whenever you want, if maybe someone want to venture into financial technology. I mean, the platform that you do the payments and stuff. So what are the requirements? Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll park that question for my colleagues here. Let's get more questions and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, morning, ma'am. Morning again, colleagues. Thank you for the nice presentation. Mine is simple. Because you say that you aspire that young people join the Reserve Bank, I have a few questions. And my question I always ask, what are the things that these young people, our students, should do so that they are more attractive, you know, to the bank, so that the bank aspires, wants to employ them. For example, in terms of, I know you do a lot of quantitative stuff. So in terms of the quantitative stuffs, what are the type of softwares that they should know? What are the type of the quantitative skills that they should have? Thank you very much.
Chloe? Quantitative skills, yeah, you can take it.
So we actually had this question in the winter school, and I'll give a similar answer to what was given there, is that it's not important like what software you know. Maybe you know R, maybe you know Stata. I mean, we have people working in Python, people who are working in like all of them. What's more important is just the attitude that you have and that you're willing to learn. And I think that like you can do the work that we do across the different softwares and across the different, like, as long as you're willing to put in the time to learn everything and like just be motivated, and it's definitely an attitude thing. I think that a lot of the things that I've learned have been on the job, because I was not really that interested in macroeconomics when I finished university, and so a lot of it was actually learned on the job, and just because I had the right attitude. I don't know if that gives a good enough answer.
So willingness to learn, she mentioned Python, she mentioned R. So I think in this day and age, it's quite important that you show interest in the technology or in programming of sorts. There's a niche skill that we're looking for lately. We're looking for economists that are able to sort of program. We're looking for economics that are more quantitatively inclined, as you say. So that looks like the future.
That being said, it's also important to like understand the dynamics of, and being able to write as well as a skill that's really important, and being able to understand how you can translate all of the information around you into something that's digestible to a lot of people.
Writing skills, very, very, very important. I think that you probably get from your lecturer side. Oh, there was a hand first. Okay. Okay.
So yeah, you mentioned uniqueness. My question is this, or my request is this: can you please point us in the right direction? What exactly are you referring talk about if to have something that's going to stand out in one's application for any aspiring like you go to the SARB to actually implement or to actually get in their applications. And then another funny one, you mentioned something about the stability of the job once you work under the SARB in the sense that you won't be retrenched regardless of what happens economically. And this and also Mr. David mentioned that you can do to another applicants interview 10 hires you. So with that strictness in the terms of hiring, I don't think they will give you a sense of fear about this thing up here. Like it's very much limited. There are not a lot of you can explain
I think I understand you. So in terms of differentiating yourself, because I use the word differentiating yourself, not necessarily unique. Differentiating yourself can be done in various ways. I mentioned differentiating yourself by making sure that in your academics, you differentiate yourself. Meaning, if the norm is that, in your class, the average is 70, it means you may need to get more than that. That's an example of differentiating yourself. Differentiating yourself means willingness to learn and do things that are outside the ordinary, outside scope of what you learn from your lectures. Differentiating yourself means being eager to knock on doors. Kagiso gave an example. Instead of just looking at the website, he also took an initiative and said, I'm printing my CV, I'm going there, right? So when you knock at doors, doors won't necessarily open immediately, but I think that's part of an attitude that Chloe was talking about. It means you don't tire, right? You try and make sure that you put your best foot forward in your academics, you put your best foot forward in the projects that you are given, you put your best foot forward in almost everything that you do. And I think that will pay off with time. And that's what differentiating yourself means. Okay, the second question you speak about, it's not too necessary. Okay, all right. So if you differentiate yourself, it's easy to, it would be easy theoretically to then be able to be accepted in institutions, not just the Reserve Bank, but opportunities will probably be available for you if you differentiate yourself. But if you sit back and you're comfortable and you do the bare minimum, and that's the principle in life, right? Then opportunities are not necessarily going to come your way. You need to go out there and look for opportunities. One thing that we hope to do better going forward is to at least have this kind of an engagement and a relationship with the University School of Economics. Have a relationship where we can then understand through the faculty what the challenges are and help where we can. If it means participating in projects with you or making our economists available to sort of coach and mentor, we can do that.
Yes, it's similar to the question I asked before, but what is it that actually stands out other than academics? Let's not talk academics, just academics. What other thing you actually look for in an individual before actually hiring them?
So I'm going to take that question. So what David was talking to speaks to, we go through quite a lot of applications, we go through a lot of interviews. It's often, or quite often when you're looking for experienced hires in particular, that we go to interviews and we come back without hiring. It's because of what I spoke to around motivational fit, right? We don't only look at hiring because you're interested in getting a salary. We're also looking at the attitude. We're also looking at your interest in terms of what we're doing. We're also looking a bit further into, is this somebody who will enjoy working for the Reserve Bank, or is this somebody who, if Florence Bukaba comes tomorrow and says, come and work for me, I'll buy you a car, they'll leave us, right? So that's what motivational fit speaks to. So it becomes difficult to attract the right skills with the right motivational fit. So the skills may be there, and others also say to us, you know what, you can keep your offer. I'd rather go to ABC suites because they're gonna give me better interest rates in terms of my home loan, etc., which are things that we accept that we're not in the space to compete for. So that's what we are talking to when we're saying we try and make sure that we strike a balance. But whilst doing that, we're not prepared to lower our standards when we're doing our recruitment process.
Just to check, in terms of your graduate program, annually, how many do you employ, drawn from universities?
So, in a worst year, we found ourselves only taking 8 graduates.
5,000 to
In a
6,000.
good year, we've taken about 25. And I did say that that depends on operational requirements. So you need to understand that in as much as, and that's what I normally say, when we're at the winter school and in the graduate programs, I normally say, we wish we could hire everyone in the room, but operational requirements need to also be taken into consideration. What does that mean? It means as an institution, we can't just bring you because we want to bring you on board, right? There's budget implications. The most important thing, there must be enough work. There's no point in us bringing people and we don't have enough work that's going to keep them challenged and that's going to help them to advance in their career.
Hello, good morning. I have a question. Mine, I think, can be answered by the Research Association. My question is, how can one go about...
Why do you think I can't answer it?
How can one go about publishing their work on your website? Because sometimes I'll be having and studying a job and I'll read through your website and find papers relating to what I'm writing about. But I just want to know, how can one be in contact with you if you want to publish a paper? Thank you.
So I assume you're talking about publishing like your own work. So there are ways that you can be involved in research at the SARB. One of the ways is obviously being an employee of the SARB and in the research department, and another way is being a research fellow. So we often have like calls for papers. So our most recent one was a climate change focused one. And so if you are interested, you'll submit a proposal for what you'd like to write about. We'll look through it, and if we like it, then you'll become a research fellow, and we'll give you like a contract. I think Florence would know more about the contract part. And then you essentially have like a time period where you have to write a paper, and then that would be published on our website and sometimes then published in maybe the South African Journal of Economics. The one before this we had was like a financial technology, financial innovation call for papers, and I think that's concluding at the moment, and I think that's then going to be published in a special edition of the South African Journal of Economics. So yeah, it is quite a lengthy process, and it is also, again, quite competitive because we get a lot of proposals, but that's one of the ways that if you are interested in publishing work with the SARB, yeah, that's how you can do it.
Okay, so you only wait for a call for proposal only, or can you just submit even if there is no call?
So as far as I know, you can't submit unless you're working with someone directly from in the research department. If there's work that you see, perhaps you can on the website. I'm sure you can reach out to the corresponding author and see if they're interested in doing work that maybe you're interested in. There's no harm in reaching out. Recently, I'm not sure how they started, but we've had some PhD students work with some of our economists at the SARB to produce working papers. So yeah, you can reach out, but I'm saying the easiest way and the most direct way is responding to a call for proposals.
Okay, mine is not a question, but rather a suggestion of how about, since you mentioned having a partnership with institutions, right? How about maybe you take maybe 3 students from each institutions where they go about a series of interviews at their institutions. Then the last round of interviews, then they have with you guys. Thank you. Okay, since they will be doing the interview at their institutions, right, then that top 3 maybe they have selected and the institution, they can come and have the last round interview with you guys at the SARB.
Noted. We will answer the question. Let's take one last question there.
So I want to know that how does the Reserve Bank engage with our universities in terms of the skills that they want? Because you find that academia is in the dark about the skills that the Reserve Bank wants. You can find that maybe you want economists who can program and who are more quantitative, but our universities don't offer that in our program. So now does the responsibility lie on institutions or universities or on students to develop those skills on their or outside academia?
You are spot on, and I think that's part of the objectives why we've started this initiative, and we want to develop relationships to provide input into your curriculum and projects that you do, so that when you leave university, you're equipped with relevant skills.
Yeah, there was a question about how you license banks, how you make it easier for people to start up financial firms and so on. What you're trying to do is strike here a balance. If a bank is badly run, it's a disaster. It can lose people's deposit money, it can get hacked like the Post Bank recently did, and a lot of money can get stolen. So if someone's setting up a bank, there are reasons. You have lots of pretty strict rules about what capital they need, what IT systems they need, all of that stuff. Yeah, at the same time, you don't want to make this something that means that only a few incumbents who are already in get to take the market and then no one else can enter. So at a big level, I think we're pretty happy that we've got a whole bunch of challenger banks kind of rising in South Africa, who are giving the traditional big 4 banks a run for their money and pushing them. We've also tried to make it much easier to license smaller banks that have kind of a simpler regulatory framework. These are the mutual banks. And so there's a team in the Prudential Authority which is in charge of this, which helps get those guys along, get them licenses. And that's a much, much less demanding framework than to get a full banking license like, your Discovery Bank or something. But still, it is not going to ever be cheap and easy to set up a bank because it's such a big responsibility. Insurance is another space where we're working to try and make it easier for people to kind of get in at the ground level. So there's a lot of insurance, there's a lot of licenses being granted to micro insurers. What we really want to see here is a place where we get South Africans onto forms of insurance that are more useful for them. A lot of South Africans don't have insurance cover, or the insurance cover they do have is for funerals or credit. Often they're paying more money than they should for those things, and they're probably not the optimal insurance products. You'd like to see people insuring some of their assets better, so theft or fire or something doesn't hit their standard of living too hard. You'd like to see people maybe with a bit of life cover, so if you lose a family member, just give them a decent burial, you protect the kind of financial well-being of the family. So I would really like to see some of the micro-insurers playing in that space. I worry too many of them are, just the 100th guy who's got an idea for a funeral policy insurance, and there's so many people in that space already, I'm not sure that's helpful, but that's a big deal. The payment thing is also interesting. We just had this big payments conference, I think it was a month back, I stand to be corrected, and there was enormous interest in that. A lot of private sector people who want to partner, and I think as we build out our payments ecosystem modernization, we're going to find a whole lot of small firms innovating on the edges of that, because that requires much less kind of, regulatory intrusiveness to make sure that payment systems work compared to banks and so on. So I think there's going to be a lot of innovation there. But I don't work very closely in this space, so I'm not the optimal person to answer this. There is good content on the website about it, though. I hope that helps. Thanks.
Thank you. I know that you said you are taking the last question, but I'm sorry to hijack that conclusion. I just thought that I should not be closed out because as Limpopians, we are proud to contributing to the development of the SARB through having the 2 governors that came from this province, including the late Tito Mboweni, especially to you, David, as part of the MPC, from me as speaking on behalf of all the people of Limpopo. You have cited that you are collaborating with UP Stellenbosch, of which leave me asking what have they done to deserve that collaboration, which we can do. So, and with this said that the two governors came from this province, you owe us, tell the governor that he owes planting to the community. The community of University of Limpopo, UNIVEN, is waiting for him to collaborate with these two universities. The question is, when are you going to collaborate with us? Yeah, and I just said a few questions which I wanted to ask when David was presenting, but I thought that I had an opportunity yesterday. But hence I let the student ask. I will spare him that. I will leave you with that question, David. Thank you.
It felt a lot more like a comment than a question. Perhaps some sort of, central banking leadership institute is called for. I think the UP chair is long-standing because, Pretoria, it's University of Pretoria, it's right next to us. We tried for a while to set up a financial stability chair, and another university right at the southern end of the continent got it, but it didn't work very well, so that got shut down. The Stellenbosch thing is really the Bureau of Economic Research. And so we get something out of that. But, I think you make a good point that something is creating governors in this part of the world, and maybe we need to be aware of something that we should develop. Thanks.
Thank you.
Can we please give the Reserve Bank a round of applause? Thank you so much. As a monetary economics lecturer, this was very insightful. This was very interesting. We appreciate your presence. Can we please welcome my HOD of Department of Economics, Prof. Itumeleng Mungale, to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, our lovely program director. My job is very simple. According to her, I'm just supposed to say thank you and then we depart. But normally one has to do certain protocol or follow certain protocols before doing that. We are extremely proud as the Department of Economics to host this delegation. I'm sure every one of you can bear testimony to the fact that this discussion or this gathering was highly useful. So indeed, in the morning I told them that I was extremely excited for this. So I hope you are also extremely excited because you have finally met this thing called Reserve Bank that we normally read about. Now it is here. So it has came down to us. But before I got into my speech, because I prepared a very long speech, the team, especially our organizer, Mr. Mabunda, came to me yesterday and said, but we must at least have a token of appreciation to our delegates. So he has been running around and then he made some connections. So I don't know what is in here, but Mr. Mabunda knows. So he found that this will be useful, or this will be much appreciated to share with our our colleagues from South African Reserve Bank. So I'm going to ask Dr. Ombeso to assist me to say thank you to our colleagues. I'm calling them colleagues because you heard them, they said they want us and our students. So they are our colleagues. So I'm going to say thank you to Dr. David and his member or his team. Thank you so much for gracing us with your wonderful presentation. We are very, 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 very lucky, I must put it that way. Professor Koma, on my behalf, please come and pass the gifts to our colleagues. Maybe, I think marketing people will want to, I know them.
Thank you very much.
Malachi?
Thank you.
Chef.
Thank you very much.
Claudia? Our homeboy. Florence Tokava. Our program. Oh, sorry.
And I chose to come here. There's a Northwest session today, but I chose to come here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Director and Dr. Ombeso, for delivering our token of appreciations. Now, as a way of saying thank you to our colleagues, I really would like to pick up from what Mr. Mukola, one of my colleagues, who mentioned the issue of the governors coming here. I would like to take it further to say, when I arrived here, the curriculum was a bit mixed up. Then I asked the former HOD, then he said, no, don't worry, we are in the process of changing this curriculum. And then to make it very, very quantitative, so I can assure our colleagues from Reserve Bank that our curriculum is very quantitative. We introduce students to, apart from normal economics modules, they have mathematics in economics, and then they have statistics in economics. So this was not the case before. Now I was informed that this curriculum was influenced by the late former governor, Mr. Tito Mboweni. He demanded that the curriculum be changed and be converted into a more quantitative type of curriculum so that we can match some of the requirements of the institutions like Reserve Bank. So in that case, Statistics was introduced, mathematics and econometrics. So right now, our research is purely quantitative and purely econometric based. So that is the contribution that was made by our late and former governor, Mr. Tito Mboweni, towards creating this new curriculum. And then I'm sure it addresses, there was a question which was saying, how should we prepare our student? I'm not rephrasing it well. Or how do we link our student to the demand of the market? Yeah, so this new development was based on that. So indeed, we have a very good historical link with the Reserve Bank along those lines. So, and then I also want to, I told my colleagues that we rely on Reserve Bank for our research. So I hope we have some of our masters and honor students here. I just want to check by show of hands, how many of you have used data from Reserve Bank in your research? Oh yeah, even those, yes. Okay, so indeed our two newly doctors, qualified doctors, they have used data from the Reserve Bank. Now, that is to show that this institution is extremely important for us. Okay, and then colleagues have also used data from Reserve Bank to publish in several international journals. Maybe I should also have requested them to raise their hands up, but that is how far we are linked to the Reserve Bank. Okay, and then in the morning also we mentioned the issue of winter school. We are very grateful for that initiative. And then one of my colleagues, Dr. Tala, said, you forgot to mention ERSA also. So this Department of Economics is benefiting from ERSA, and then Dr. Tala informed me that ERSA is being sponsored by the Reserve Bank. So I don't know whether we have some of our students here who have pocketed some amount of money from ERSA. So this is the source. Okay. So we are very thankful for such initiatives which are helping us to link well with the Reserve Bank. So like I said, we are also very, very happy because it is for the first time that we get this kind of a direct career information from the Reserve Bank. So this will definitely encourage our students to work in such a way that they can be geared up for careers in such institutions. And then we are also doing research. I'm not sure whether that is, now I'm beginning to wonder whether is it not the influence of the winter school, because recently I've seen most of my students were telling me that they want to do research in climate change. So we've got several master students here who are doing research in climate change. So it was a very, very unique. We were moving away from focusing on economic growth, then we started to focus on climate change. So indeed, we are in line with their research themes. Okay. So with those few words, I would like to say thank you very much. We indeed enjoyed your presentation. I'm sure we are now more knowledgeable with what is happening. We hope that this is not for the last time, because every year we bring in new crop of students who will be in need of your motivation. And I'm also very happy that we have young men from this province, which will also be some kind of a motivation to our students, because the question is always, what about youth employment? So we can see some kind of that demonstration from Reserve Bank, and then they have also invited you. So let me say thank you very, very much colleagues on behalf of the Department of Economics for doing this. Like I said, we hope it is not for the last time. Thank you so much. And then,
thank you so much to Prof. Mungale. We have reached the end of our program. We're going to ask Mr. Mabunda to come and give us announcements and official closing of the program.
Good afternoon, colleagues. The first announcement is that the South African Reserve Bank, Professor Mwale, they would love to say something once more.
I promise I will not talk as long this time. We just want to say, Professor Makale, we also have a small token of thanks to you. If you please come up. It's really nice for us to come here, we do our event last night, and then come to this university, have all these excellent students, these nice professors who made time to talk to us. So thank you for creating this opportunity for us to reach out. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Last one. Yes, sir. That was it.
The second announcement is that the Reserve Bank would love a group photo, and then when we leave here, can we stand this side next to T-side so that we can have that group photo. After that, I would love our fellow colleagues in the departments and colleagues from sister departments to usher our delegates from the Reserve Bank to Staff CAF. And then that would be the end of my announcements. Thank you.
Oh yeah, more stuff from the plane.
Much better than TCT
Oh, really?
as well. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, they don't. TCT is like a more cookie. Everyone comes as like.